metal, and plastic. So we'll get into it a little bit later on what the difference is, but and how this affects the economics of processing recyclables after marketing the processed recyclables. A dirty MRF is a MRF where the waste processing system has solid waste mixed in with recyclables. The recyclables are separated out through a combination of manual and mechanical sorting. Trash from a dirty MRF is then transported to a landfill or an incinerator for disposal. Dirty MRFs recover from anywhere from 5 to 45% of incoming materials as recyclable. Whether or not MRFs are clean or dirty, it's trends, economic trends determine which models work for specific recycling communities. Most of the MRFs that we use for residential recycling are clean MRFs. So let's see, I have a video. Let's see if I can play it. So, all right. I'm not sure if my feed, if this is going to play out or not. So this is basically a clean MRF and the operation for how things are done. Things are put on the tipping room floor, and trying to, oops, sorry, I lost my video. And so there are various mechanical and labor components that sort them. Materials go onto conveyors. They use magnets to sort out ferrous metals from it. There's a lot of human labor involved in picking and sorting the materials. So when you get to specific types of plastics that are sorted, they basically are, there are eddy currents, which are puffs of air which blow them out. The end product for all of this mechanical sorting and manual sorting is that we have all of the recyclables that are coming into the MRF are separated into their constituent materials. So plastics, metal, glass, paper, and cardboard. As you can see, it's a kind of a messy business. Even though these are cleaned and rinsed recyclables, it just takes a lot for everything to get to the end product where it is acceptable for marketing. So, all right, let's close this. Just trying to make sure I know how to. Trying to see closing that. All right, so once the glass and plastic streams are separated by disc screens, and when these materials are baled and ready for marketing, glass is crushed into a cullet for ease of transportation. And the plastics, as I had indicated, may be separated by polymer type, and sometimes they use an optical sort using infrared technology. The infrared technology reacts with the different types of polymers, so we're able to separate and bale those materials. So, and once we have the baled materials, we basically, the recycling processor will then market them. And the markets for paper, it can be baled into various grades, and these are like any other commodity. So paper will, the market fluctuates, and grades of paper have, regular, have values that just like any other raw material. Cardboard is usually baled into old corrugated cardboard, chipboard, and cardstock. Sometimes cardstock is considered just a heavier grade of paper. Cans, metal can be processed, aluminum tin cans versus scrap metal. Plastic is sorted, as I had just indicated, into the various resin codes. Glass can be sorted by color or marketed as mixed cullet. So cullet, again, as I said, is when the broken glass pieces are just in a fine material. And when all of these things are baled and ready for market, the things that you are trying to avoid that can decrease the value it's contamination. So there are several different types of contamination. There's the first is called, that we in the collection and supply side of to recycling processors is wish cycling. Wish cycling is when somebody in a commercial business or somebody in a residential home has a product, a wire hanger, a string of Christmas lights, another thing, and they look at it and they decide, oh, this should be recyclable, even though China, something like that, or a dish or something, it could be. They look at it, and though it's not explicitly stated to be taken in a curbside or a commercial recycling program, they put it into the bin anyway because they think, well, let somebody on the back end sort this out. One of the big problems with wish cycling is plastic bags. Plastic bags and other plastic film are recyclable, but in the system that you saw where things are going onto conveyors, they're tanglers. Garden hoses are also a tangler. They get onto the line, they get off the belt, they get into the rollers, they can, basically cause a system shutdown. And if you shut down the system, it can take a half an hour to 45 minutes to get the tangler out and to get the system up and running again. And if you can't process it, in a timely manner, it's going to throw off the entire business model of what makes for successful recycling. So wish cycling is a big problem. For paper and cardboard, water is and mold are the enemy for marketing. So you want a dry paper product because these things are being baled, and if there's moisture in the center of the bale, mold can grow and fester and contaminate the whole pile. And then outthrows are when the wrong type of recyclable material, something that is recyclable, is mixed into the wrong bale. So it might be cardboard in a paper bale, and everything that these bales, when they're on the market, if you could have, up to, it used to be that you could have about 5% of, contamination in a recycled bale, and it would still be marketable. Or you could have, between 5 and 10% of outthrows, and it would still be a marketable bale in the international markets. Things have changed. So the next slide and this bullet point basically talks to it. China upended the international recycling market with its domestic policies of green fence and national sword beginning in 2017. So prior to 2017, and a little bit of history here. When residential and commercial recycling programs were coming online in the late 80s and early 90s in the US, the programs were both focused on both collecting and marketing domestically. So it was, a business model that worked because there weren't a lot of the mills, and the end users of the products that were being created by recycling were located domestically, and it was it worked in a relative circle. At the same time, China was developing, but it had, as a strong manufacturing sector, but they didn't have an undeveloped, their recycling was undeveloped. And at the time, it was inexpensive for a cargo freighter to be shipped. So China, over the course from the 90s through like 2010, had become the primary buyer of European and US recyclables. It became more profitable for programs in the US to ship recyclables over to China than to process them domestically. So the infrastructure for the manufacturing infrastructure for making new paper from recycled bales, or scrap metal, plastic, and glass, it was kind of taken offline or not retrofitted to keep up with the times because China was buying all of our stuff to feed their growing production economy. So since 2007, U.S. Exports to China have been huge. So for like 10 years, from 2007 to like 2017, 31% of our recycling scrap was exported to China at a value of about $5.6 billion. In 2016, the U.S. exported 16 million tons of plastic, glass, and metal to China, but the quality of materials that we were shipping was poor. There was sometimes up to 30% contamination in those bales that ended up going to China, and China, as the end user of these raw materials, was basically taking that 30% and throwing it out internally. So, and China, they use open pit, landfills that aren't lined. So these materials were basically a major pollution source in China's countryside. And as it was in their countryside, it was getting in their rivers and washing out to their oceans. So China was, contributing the local environment in China was suffering because of all of these poorly contaminated recyclable materials being imported. So in 2013, China had a growing middle class, and they started flexing their muscle, and they put in place Operation Green Fence. It was an attempt to reduce the level of contamination on the incoming recyclable materials, and it was meant to increase. So this meant an increase in the inspections of incoming loads, with containers being rejected. So the moisture level for a bale of paper or cardboard that was coming in was being reduced, and loads were being rejected. In 2017, Operation Green Fence was then changed into China's national sword policy. And that would lead to a ban in January of 2018 of mixed plastics and mixed paper scrap, impacting $500 million in trade with the US. In March 2018, China launched an extremely strict threshold on bale contamination. So what normally could be between, greater than 5% was now 0.5% contamination. So this was, much lower than the industry standards for bale contamination. And it was, for a lot of recycling processors and marketers, it was unachievable. Even with the sophisticated sorting equipment, just because, as you saw from the B-roll that we showed, there's a human component in, recycling. And human component can be human error, mechanical error as well. So it was very difficult. Once China did this, Europe, Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, it kind of upended all of the recycling markets. So they also decided to ban all plastics, small electric motors, insulated wire by the end of 18, and other stainless steel and metallic scrap by the end of 2019. This had a massive impact. And I mean, just for our residential recycling program, where we were making a large revenue for paper and cardboard prior to 2018, we ended up, that became revenue neutral for paper, and bottles, cans, and plastics went from being a modest income too, but basically just the modest income was covering the handling costs and the processing costs. So it went from revenue neutral to be about $78 per ton to process. I mean, this had an $800,000 impact on the town's residential recycling budget. And that, coupled with, very tight budgets, it created a situation fiscally where we had to really scramble to not exceed the tax cap. So there have been other Southeast Asian markets that have opened up while China has shut down. Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand were all now being sought as a place for recycling marketers to export their materials to. But as you can see, I mean, as you probably can just realize, they're not as big geographically as China. They don't have the same demand, and the number of users who were trying to access those markets was significant, and the market share was small. And so it led to the flipping of the economies of marketing the recyclables upside down. And now a lot of those smaller Southeast Asian nations are also implementing similar protocols to China, just because the product they're getting is still relatively contaminated, and it's just problematic. So they're shutting down to a lot of US markets as well. So, and the European and Australian markets. So that's the international, or the big picture of how recycling operates, internationally, how we get from the mechanics of collection to the marketing, and how the international markets are affecting what, can be done with expansion of recycling programs. So flipping it to something local that more affects more, the business community that's probably on this Zoom meeting. This is the commercial recycling in the town of Huntington. So Town Code 117-24 specifically talks about commercial source separation of recyclable materials. And to just go through it, it indicates that anybody who generates industrial or commercial solid waste shall separate from their non-recyclable municipal solid waste those recyclable items as designated by the director of this department, who's John Clark. What anything that an economic market exists for. So for the purpose of an economic market, for the purpose of town code, means the instance in which the full avoided cost of proper collection, transportation, and disposal of the recyclable item are equal to or greater than the cost of collection, transportation, and sale of those recyclable items, less the amount received from the sale. So to break that down a little bit, the town operates in conjunction with Smithtown and a private partner, Covanta, a waste to energy incinerator in East Northport. So commercial businesses can bring their solid waste there, pay a tipping fee per ton to dispose of it, and with that solid waste is burned, and it generates electricity, which is then sold through a power purchase agreement to LIPA. So commercial accounts on average are anywhere from $61 to $67 per ton for utilizing that service at that facility. So that's setting the market rate for what commercial recycling in the town of Huntington, what those markets are. So if anything costs even 1 cent more than the cost of, let's say, $67 per ton, there is not a viable economic market for that recyclable, and therefore it is not required to be an enforceable recyclable item by the town's town code. So it's a little bit interesting that given the way China has upended, not China, but Green Sword and or National Sword and Green Fence upended the recycling markets, and knowing what the town pays for its residential curbside recyclables, the only things that currently have economic markets are mixed office paper and old corrugated cardboard. Every mixed office paper, the town's recycling processor is revenue neutral. So they don't charge us for it, but we also don't make a small revenue. Old corrugated cardboard, when it's separated out from mixed office paper, we will make $15 a ton. This is a little bit below what the current markets are doing, but we have a long-term agreement with our processor. Well, not a long-term, but a multi-year agreement with our recycling processor that was, those terms were very good at the time of the market. It's always good to, when you structure these deals, to tie it to a certain level below what those baled recyclables are trading for on the open market, slightly below, so you can incorporate the processor's operating expenses into that. But the market was so poor when we entered into this agreement in 2019 that the terms, we just agreed to flat rates, revenue neutral, and $15 a ton. So for commercial recyclers or business entities in the town right now, or if you have a store or a retail establishment or a restaurant in Huntington Village where we pick up curbside commercial waste, the only things we're collecting for the second recycling run are paper and cardboard. And those are mixed together. So it's actually all revenue neutral. We are exploring just going to even limiting the paper component, so we could then just go to cardboard and eke out a small revenue. But I don't think the net gain would justify the decrease in service. So with regard to some of our current recyclables, with plastics. So plastics, as I had mentioned, are baled according to their resin code. The resin code is, if you look on the bottom of, I'm going to turn this off for a sec, share my screen. Oops, no, I'm trying to, how do I, oops, oh, stop share. There we go. Thank you. So um, just to, this is a recyclable number two. If you look at the bottom of the can or the jar or the bottle, there's a stamped triangle in there, and it usually has a number 1 through 7 on them. And those are the various resin codes of plastic. So right now, plastics 1 and 2 are the only ones that have an economic market for our processors. So even after baling, there's somebody who's willing to buy this stuff. So plastic 1 and 2, which is PET, it's found in water, soda, and juice bottles. So we've got, juice, water, and other bottles. And then the number 2s are milk and detergent containers. So we'll have kind of a laundry detergent or a milk container. And those things are baled using the optical sorting equipment at like the recycling facility. And they still have strong markets. So when they're marketed internationally, it might be a misconception by the consumer that they're being recycled into new plastic bottles and containers. Unfortunately, the economics of production, it's still cheaper to make new plastic bottles for 1s and 2s than it is to recycle these materials into new containers. So what actually happens is these materials are downcycled, and downcycling means that you become, it's a lower quality, lesser value plastic product. So for the number 1, the PETs, the water, juice, and soda bottles, the most common downcycled material is a polyester fleece. So this is made from 100% EcoSpun, which is from recycled PET. And other things, it can become, polycotton fabrics, fiberfill, so the stuffing for pillows, carpeting, also a very common use for PET. The number 2, the milk and soda bottle, most often becomes your Trex or your plastic lumber. And again, these things, so if you think of recycling, or the way we've always been brought up to think of or taught about recycling, it's supposed to be an endless cycle where materials are reused over and over. But in the reality of, when you introduce the cost of production of new versus recycled materials, downcycling becomes a better, a better option, a more viable economic option for certain types of plastics. Now, the marketer that we use, in the town of Huntington for residential curbside recycling, we take all resin codes 1 through 7. So there really isn't a market for the 3s, the 4s, the 5s. 5s are probably polypropylene, which are usually your yogurt containers, some food containers also, the clamshells. 6 is polystyrene, styrofoam. These materials are all recyclable, but the cost of processing versus the cost of production of new, just, it doesn't make any sense. Now, the recycler that we work with currently bales everything that's not a 1 or a 2 together. So you got 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, no, but 7s, which is just an other category. And in those mixed bales, they do get to market them, but also in the fact that for the residential program, we're trying to capture as many 1s and 2s as possible, since they have an aftermarket value. So casting the net wide and taking all of the recyclables 1 through 7 puts the onus on, basically our processor, as opposed to the homeowner, to inspect their recyclable material at home. We'll get more 1s and 2s if we take everything. And again, our marketer and our processor and marketer, his mixed bales, I've been told that they do have an aftermarket value. And part of that also is because the PET and the HDPE and the 1s and 2s, it's not just in these blown plastic bottles anymore. So there are new types of recycling containers that are 1s and 2s that don't traditionally look like 1s and 2s. So the manual sort that the people who are picking off the line and sorting them, they have a trained eye. So they know when they see that detergent bottle that it goes into the 2 pile. They know when they see the soda bottle, it goes in the 1, but then a 1 might slip by them because it's a food container that's a takeout that has a black bottom and a plastic snap-on lid. So that might end up in the mixed bale, which actually increases its marketability. So that's the state of marketing, plastics. The next, what else do we have? So other discrete recyclables, the markets, there's a strong market for tin and aluminum cans. Tin is used, and aluminum are used. They are a circular economy. They can be used to make new cans. They can be used in, the production of steel. So they can be used in building products. With regard to paper, as I had indicated a little bit, the market has come back around in 2020. So it's moved from revenue neutral to a revenue generator. Corrugated cardboard, that has remained strong, and it's fairly obvious when you give it some consideration. The amount of online retailers, the amount of corrugated cardboard boxes that are moving around and being left on doorsteps by Amazon and other online retailers is just crazy. So that creates a very strong market for corrugated cardboard. But again, it needs to be separated out from the paper to use for it to have the greatest value. And then the worst case scenario for marketing recyclables is glass. So in theory, glass should be 100% recyclable. It's a closed loop. You should be able to take glass bottle and make a new glass bottle or jar. So it should just be endlessly recyclable, but the contamination of that glass, it usually precludes that. So you can't make a new bottle or jar. Even the smallest piece of contamination, a broken ceramic plate will contaminate a whole bunch of color, which is the broken glass that's processed. And also, if you think about it, glass should be color sorted for you to get the highest dollar value and the most marketability. If you have green, blue, brown, and clear mixed together and it's all in the same color, you try to create a new glass jar from that, it's going to make kind of an unattractive grayish, brownish color. So sorting out the glass into its discrete color values increases its marketability. There's actually a strong market for, not strong market, there is a market for clear glass. So our recycler will, pull the clear out and sort it as it's passing by all of his pickers on the line. And then they will, the glass has a market, but a lot of the other unbroken or the broken colored glass that's mixed colors, it actually gets shipped to Brookhaven. And the Brookhaven landfill is allowed by state regulators, the New York State DEC, to use, the recycled broken glass cullet as a daily cover on the landfill. So, and then it's not being reused in a manner that most people in the public would actually consider to be true recycling. So how do you address this? So we've looked at some of the problems, how the markets are very volatile depending on international factors, and how do you address this at a local level and try and make recycling, a viable program? Because everybody wants to recycle, but when the cost of recycling far exceeds the cost of processing garbage, nobody is going to want to. It doesn't make good economic sense. So you have to kind of balance the scales. So you can adapt to new market conditions by developing the domestic markets. As I had indicated back when we were setting up these programs before China basically gobbled up the market share, we did have recycling, infrastructure in this country to use recyclables in manufacturing, but that stuff has atrophied. Ever since 2018, companies have been retrofitting and bringing stuff online. Mills are developing, but those things take time. So we need to improve the technology for sorting and recovering materials at both for the manufacturers, and we need to reduce the contamination and outthrows, in those processing facilities. So we need to devote time to, and capital to improving the processing of these recyclables, so we deliver the best possible product out into the market. And, our recycler has indicated they still can get into China. So if they have less than 0.5% of contamination in their baled loads, and it's marketable even in that strict environment. So it can be done. It just takes time and it takes caring. And you could also, one of the things that can be done is we can incorporate additional recycled materials into end use products. So we need to create a demand for them. So if we have an end use in government, the town's purchasing law allows us to, instead of awarding to the lowest bidder for a ream of paper, we can award if that ream of paper has within 5% of the low bidder and contains recycled content, then we can actually purchase that even though it's not the lowest responsible bid. And that's an example of what government procurement can do to create demand. Another example is even in construction, that broken glass that's going to Brookhaven and being used as daily cover, it could be used as drainage in road construction projects. But it's up to governments and mandates from the state and local level to mandate that use, as opposed to using something like bank run or something that will not, you can't even say or equivalent, because the contractor is going to go for, a material that they've worked with and are comfortable with to minimize their liability, as opposed to using glass as a drainage material. But it's important to create those markets and those opportunities for recycled products to be able to develop and continue those programs. And what's coming up? So basically, New York State is trying, and other other states and other municipalities across the country have a goal of trying to get to zero waste. New York City has a goal of trying to get to zero waste and by 2030. And zero waste begets a circular economy, and the circular economy is a systemic approach to development and manufacturing that decouples growth from the consumption of finite resources. So, a linear economy has you just consuming and disposing, and even recycling in a linear economy, it's more like downcycling, where things go back and then get another use. But eventually, after you use that fleece and it's ended its useful life, it is going into maybe a textile recycling program, but more often than not, it's being thrown out as scrap. So the circular economy is exactly what it sounds like. It's a true model of recycling where everything it's a closed loop, and things are used over and over, and there's zero waste from the manufacturing and sale of goods and services. So New York State DEC has implemented some of these things, and there are some interesting laws that are coming up. The one beginning January 1st, 2022, the New York State Food Donation and Food Scraps Recycling Law will take effect. And that it's basically a food scraps and organic recycling program. It's probably not going to affect anybody on this call, but it requires large generators of food scraps. So somebody who's, or a business that's generating more than 2 tons of food waste per week, to donate the excess edible food to charitable institutions like the Harry Chapin or something like that, and then to recycle all the remaining food scraps if they are within 25 miles of an organics recycler. Vigliotti at Long Island Compost is the only current organics recycler who is cited on Long Island. I believe it's Manorville, and it's well outside 25-mile boundary for any business that operates in the town of Huntington. And certain larger institutions and universities, nursing homes, hospitals are exempt from this food scraps recycling law. But this is creating a market like I was talking about. So even though Mr. Vigliotti's process, and it's basically going to be a digester, something similar to that would be used in wastewater treatment to generate biogas, and then a compostable material that could be sold at the end product of the food scrap recycling process. And if he's developing it, there's probably going to be other people who are going to weigh the pros and cons and do a cost benefits analysis. And there might be additional, processors and recyclers that pop up. And if one does pop up, there might be some institutions in the town that are required to recycle their food scraps. Another interesting thing is product stewardship or expanded producer responsibility laws. And there are some that have been in place, but this basically puts the onus of recycling onto the manufacturer of that product. So there are certain product stewardship or producer responsibility laws that are already in place. When you go and buy automotive tires, they're required to take your tires back. If you're buying them at the business that's selling you. Also, same with automotive batteries, cell phones, motor oil, plastic bags. If you go into the supermarket, you see that, there's a plastic bag drop off for any supermarket that's greater than, I believe it's 10,000 square feet, or operates multiple establishments whose sum total is greater than 10,000 square feet. So these are all products that there is a small amount of a deposit or some kind of fee that's attached. It's built into the production of the product and is therefore used to offset the cost of recycling on the back end. E-waste, which was rolled out in 2012 by the state, unfortunately didn't roll out as successfully as the state had probably envisioned this. With the cost, they set up quotas for market share for various, like Toshiba or Dell or Pioneer or any of these other electronics manufacturers. They determined what their market share was, and they had to achieve a certain percentage of that. Once they had done that, they were not required to pay or to participate in any way, shape, or form. So the cost of the e-waste ban, because it was banned from being processed as solid waste, ended up rolling back onto various municipalities. And that was never the intention of the law. So I think they've learned from that, and they're developing additional producer responsibility laws that address this. There is one, a law was passed, I think it was in 2019, about paint. So, the department has been in contact with the Paint Council, which is going to be setting up, disposal of paint is often a huge problem at the municipal level. We do have a household hazardous materials drop off where you can take, oil-based paint stains or varnishes, but latex paint, the paint that everybody uses, there was no way to handle it except process it as solid waste. And people would often be throwing out, a half a gallon of paint in a container, and you can imagine what happens when it goes in the back of a garbage truck and it's compacted. So the liquid paint would spray all over, cause property damage. We have extensive guidelines for how to dry it out and throw it out. But now this producer responsibility law, which is rolling out and should be in place probably at some point this year with the drop-off sites, will be the industry. The Paint Council is setting up these locations, and they will collect the paint, they will recycle the paint, they will often try and use it for a beneficial reuse. But the cost of all of this has been rolled onto this industry governing body and taken out of the hands of the municipality. So that's showing that these expanded producer responsibility laws are kind of a work in progress. There's something actually on the Senate floor, New York State Senate floor right now by State Senator Kaminsky. It was introduced in January. That's going to do another expanded producer responsibility law, but it's going to be broad reaching. This one's in committee. I don't know if it's going to get out, but it's going to put a small surcharge on almost all materials. And so to offset the cost of just recycling the packaging. And hopefully this will have a twofold. It'll be able to provide grants that reimburse the cost of municipal recycling programs. And it'll also cause the manufacturers to consider reducing the amount of packaging and to start marketing and packing their products in more environmentally friendly ways. So that's basically a broad overview of what is going on in commercial and residential recycling. I appreciate everybody's time, and I'm open to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. We do have some questions in the
All
chat
right.
box. I know some people were asking away if you want to
Oh
pull.
yeah, I'm opening chat now.
There you go. And then we
So
can open it up if anybody wants to ask in person as well.
yes. So there was a question from Glenn Gordon to everybody. So what happens to the deposit bottles? Well, one of the things, those deposit bottles, they were supposed to go into an environmental protection fund, but unclaimed deposits are going back to the beverage distributors, and they don't go back to the state. So we're not getting the full amount of those nickel deposits that we should be getting. And again, these are all things that are being addressed and as we are developing these new expanded producer responsibility laws. There's been a call to increase the amount of deposits on, or to apply those deposits to liquor and wine bottles, or to even increase the cost of those deposits. Some of the local processors say instead of a nickel, it should be, 10 cents or even a quarter for like a larger glass bottle, just to really incentivize the fact that they could take them back, color sort them, and just to create some funding for the successful operation of the program. Beverage distributors are probably the best equipped to create real quality glass product because they can color sort. They can also, things can go directly back to the beverage manufacturers as opposed to creating color. So, which is, as we discussed, just it's a loser of a product, especially when it's mixed color. All right. What else do we got? So Huntington, do businesses in Huntington recycle? On our commercial curbside routes, we are collecting paper and cardboard. We have, when markets are good, also had bottles, cans, and plastics in the curbside programs. We are seeing an increased call for this because of all the development of the mixed use businesses, or mixed use buildings in the town. So the residential component above the retail establishment on the first floor wants to be able to recycle. Unfortunately, we don't have the bottles and cans recycling available for those residences. So we do direct any people who are in Huntington Village or other mixed use buildings to access the town's recycling center, which is a drive-in and drop-off program where we have all of these different recyclable materials. We have bins and a drop-off facility for them. So what percentage of what residents put out for recycling ends up in the landfill? So that's from Beth Finger. So Beth, we, as I think I had indicated, none of the waste or the residual from our recycling ends up in landfills in Huntington. We don't, Long Island doesn't have a local landfill law. And we do have relationships with a lot of the recycling companies or the local processors, the permitted facilities, to incinerate their waste at our Covanta facility in East Northport. Recycling rates on average are about 12 to 14%. We do about 100,000 tons, and this is just residential. So in the 66,000 homes in the town of Huntington that take their waste to, their municipal solid waste to Covanta, where it's incinerated and sold for power. We generate about 100,000 tons per year. And of recyclables, we do between, when you add up 6,000 tons for paper and cardboard, and about 9,000 tons for bottles, cans, and plastics, because we still include glass in our curbside program. We're doing about 15,000 tons as opposed to the 100,000 tons of MSW. So our recycling rate of just those captured curbside, 15%. My math is probably a little bit off, but that's about it. The state allows us to also consider composted yard waste as a recyclable. So that number actually drives our, if you, in our compliance report for our solid waste management plan, our actual recycling number, when you incorporate composted yard waste, is closer to about 25 or 26%. So Keith wants to know how contamination is prevented. It's prevented primarily through education and through enforcement. When we were using a single stream model of recycling from 2014 through 2017, and single stream all in one thing, our capture rates were significantly improved. So that 15% I was just talking about was closer to like 22%. But wish cycling was a big problem with that, because people were throwing their Christmas lights in there, putting in their wire hangers, and it wasn't really an issue. But when China pulled out, the single stream facility that was operating in Brookhaven also had to shut their doors. So in order to adapt to the changing market, we went from single stream recycling back to dual stream. And in conjunction with that, we did a real big PR push to try and educate our residents about what constitutes good recyclable materials. We actually used a tag that said, when in doubt, throw it out. So on our trash pickup and recycling calendar residentially, if you look at every single month, we have what we want and what we don't. And we try and reinforce that message throughout the calendar year. We did a separate mailer in 2020 to try and do that. And then we have one full-time and 3 part-time sanitation inspectors. We started new carting contracts for the companies that are under contract to the town that pick up waste curbside, where we had a zero tolerance policy. So if there was any contamination visible at the curb, the entire container was left behind. So it's through education and enforcement, and the enforcement upset a lot of people. We had a lot of hostile callers calling into the department, but the end result was the quality of product that we're delivering to our processor is very good and makes it very marketable. So that's that is where we're at with how to prevent the contamination. So do homes ever get notices for not recycling or recycling wrong? We do, as I had just indicated. That circular that we mailed out, we also have copies that we give to people. And it is just a notice of non-compliance. When we have not fined anybody, we prefer the carrot, not the stick. So we just try and educate. And people have often, in their frustration, said, well, I'm just not going to recycle anymore. Then we tell them it's kind of mandatory. But again, I know New York City had flirted during the Bloomberg administration with enforcing mandatory recycling just for those items that were marketable at the time. I don't know of any place that has actually ever done that. So it might have some political blowback. But like I said, so the carrot, not the stick. Somebody wants to know where yard waste, Emily May wants to know where yard waste is composted. Our yard waste is processed at the Power Crush facility, which is right off of Old Northport Road and Town Line Road in Kings Park. They process it at multiple locations, some out east on Long Island, some also in Pennsylvania. So as long as they take it to a permitted facility for the regulator of that facility for Pennsylvania or for New York, we get their certificates that show that the facility is permitted, and that's where it goes. We do try and encourage as minimal transport as possible with the recyclables, just because it's better it's cheaper to keep it local. How many carting contractors does the department work with? From Ken Patrick. So we have, I believe, 8 carters under contract to the town. Commercial carters, we license about 100 annually in conjunction with the town clerk's office. So, the town licenses any number of solid waste haulers. And they do provide in their applications for annual licensing a list of what percentage of material is handled as construction demolition material versus recyclable material versus MSW. So there's a data set. I don't know how reliable it is, but there's a data set there that could be mined. We just don't do it. We pass that along to the state, and they also have state licensing requirements for their waste transporter permits that are probably a little bit more reliable than ours. So recycling is mandatory in the town of Huntington. Michael Gerto asked, it is mandatory. It's written into local law, similar to, there's a residential source separation law that's in town code, that's basically the town code above the commercial one that I quoted on a slide a little bit earlier.
So can I actually ask about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds to me like there's, right now, given that China's not buying our recycling, that there's really no economically feasible way that recycling brings money into the town, which I'm kind of extrapolating into. Every time we recycle something, it increases our taxes because it's a draw on the town of Huntington. So it's kind of interesting to me that something that is mandatory also increases our taxes. And then it also sounds like to me that most of the material, while it doesn't end up in a town of Huntington landfill, it does end up in a landfill somewhere, because it sounds like China was just throwing it into the ground anyway. And so we're kind of making something mandatory that is just ending up in a landfill and then also increasing our taxes. And if I'm wrong in that, please let me know. But that's just the way it sounds.
Yeah, no, I hope I didn't give that impression. So residential, the commercial recycling, as I had indicated on the slide, it's only when you can, when the cost of recycling exceeds the cost of, the cost of processing solid waste, that there's an economic market. But for residential recycling, it's mandatory from New York, from our New York State. If we provide a curbside collection for solid waste, we are obligated by New York State to provide that same service. So the goal of recycling, as deemed by our state regulators, is that it's a worthwhile goal that operates separate and distinctly from the local taxing base, because markets can vary. But the goal of recycling and trying to get to zero waste and to develop the circular economy for production, it exceeds what might be hitting you on any given year on your property taxes. There was, back in 2008, I was making $400,000 a year, bringing revenue in for paper, and we were making $32 a ton as a revenue co-share with our processor for mixed bottles, cans, and plastics. Again, some of that was because China was consuming all these materials. And again, I don't want to say, to go back to the slide, China was hungry. People were for materials. They're a production economy. They were taking everything in, which was creating, developing single stream, and we were relaxing our standards for what was considered contamination. So 30% of what was going into China was ending up in ravine landfills, and some of it washing out in rivers. But 70% of that was also actually being recycled and going into the production of new paper and cardboard, of new steel, of new bottles and cans. So the goal is more, we got to think geologically as opposed to, the next election cycle. And it's just, recycling is a worthwhile goal. Getting to zero waste is a worthwhile goal, and you need to devote the proper resources to it. So, and things will come back. The paper market was bad, and then it was good, and it's bad and it's good. It just takes time, which is why you have to think more, as an era as opposed to a small thing. The infrastructure will be developed to use our recycled materials regionally.
All right, Matt, looks like Michael wants to say something also.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to chime into Matt's response, which I think is right on point. So, there was an assumption years back that recycling would make money and not cost money. Well, it's always going to cost money because you're collecting it in the first place. But as Matt pointed out, there's the very important feature to this is that we're reusing the Earth's resources. So that's worthwhile doing. But in reality, even when the markets are not that good, the offset in pricing between disposing of materials as MSW by either incinerating them or sending them out to the landfill, that avoided cost, as long as your recycling cost is less, you're also in a better frame of mind, because every ton that gets recycled is less money that you have to spend on that ton to be disposed of as MSW. So, Winters Brothers here, we're the largest recycler on the island, largest commercial waste collector. We also operate the Brookhaven MRF. And the other point that Matt's making and that I want to support also is these markets are volatile, but they're coming back. As an example, right now, we're getting an enormous price for HDPE, milk containers. We're getting more money for that plastic than aluminum. So that goes back and forth, and commercial recyclers have learned to work with markets on paper and cardboard for over the years. And I think the residential recyclers are also learning that there is a cost, but there's also the potential credits, the two items that Matt mentioned, and I would certainly support his comments.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Michael.
That does make sense. So as those markets go up and down, so 1 year plastic recycling for milk containers might cost the town money. 1 year it might, bring in money. And so do those prices change every year as I'm assuming RFPs go out? Or is it just, because I think right now you said it was what, $70 a ton for the town of Huntington to pay the recyclers to take the recycling, and then the recyclers are then selling that recycling to other manufacturers or recyclers. So do we get at least some of that money back as the markets rally?
Sid, with the market volatility that basically came online with the green national sword policy in 2018, our RFPs were basically 1 year with 2 1-year extensions, because we recognized that things were incredibly volatile. Our internal research knew it was going to be 3 to 5 years before real things started to stabilize. We're kind of in year 3 right now. Things, as Michael said, things are turning around. So December 31st, sometime this summer, I'll be putting out another RFP. So yeah, when markets are good, we do longer term contracts. And when there's volatility, we kind of tend to go year to year. It minimizes our gain. And even when we renewed at the last November, the terms we were getting, which was revenue neutral for mixed office paper, $15 a ton for cardboard, and $76 a ton for commingled bottles, cans, and plastics, it was still good. We were looking at what Smithtown, who had just done a bid, their terms were a little bit better, but Huntington's a special case also. We don't even have, Smithtown has a MRF, a small one, Brookhaven has a MRF. Huntington does not have a facility where we can additionally sort and deliver a better product. So we're kind of off the route trucks, goes right to our processor. So we're kind of beholden to that. So we've looked at siting, even just a transfer station where we could do a little bit of handling, but the cost benefits analysis, it doesn't work out. So we're always looking at that though. But you're right, short term right now is the best way to address the volatile market.
All right, Matt, thank you for your time. It is 1 hour, and that's what we budgeted for this presentation. So I appreciate everybody